Ever heard a really wild rumor about someone? Like, really out there?
Oh, yeah, they can spread like wildfire, can't they?
Well, imagine this. There was a buzz going around about Jesus, okay? And it was that his own family thought he'd totally lost it.
Seriously? His actual family?
Seriously. It's right there, Mark chapter 3, verse 21. You just think, wow, talk about awkward family gatherings, right?
Absolutely. Imagine them showing up like, okay, Jesus, time to come home now. Embarrassing, maybe.
Totally. So at the heart of this crazy talk, there seems to be this fundamental clash, what Jesus valued versus what everyone else expected. That's really what we want to get into today.
It really throws you for a loop, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That his closest relatives felt they needed to, intervene.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't enough to raise eyebrows, you had the religious leaders from Jerusalem adding their own spin.
Oh, right, that too.
Yeah, they accused him of being possessed by, the ultimate bad guy, Beelzebul.
Beelzebul, wow.
And said he was using the prince of demons' power to kick out other demons. So it was just controversy piled on controversy.
Exactly. So you've got his family thinking he's gone off the deep end, and the religious top brass saying he's in cahoots with evil.
It's extreme.
So what was it about Jesus that sparked these reactions, like polar opposite reactions, but both pretty intense? What was he doing?
Well, it's fascinating to dig into that phrase, out of his mind. The original Greek word exesto, it kind of suggests someone was beside themselves.
Yeah.
Or off their center.
Off their center, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily like a clinical diagnosis we'd use today. It pointed more to someone operating way outside the accepted norms,
Like maybe that friend who quits a super stable job to suddenly chase some artistic dream.
Exactly. Everyone else might think they're a little nuts.
Right.
Even if it makes perfect sense to them.
Right. Okay, so let's make this off-center idea more concrete. What's an example?
Well, just before this family incident, earlier in Mark 3, Jesus heals a guy with a withered, messed up hand.
Okay.
He does it on the Sabbath, inside the synagogue.
Oh, big no-no.
Huge violation of their interpretation of the religious rules. And the reaction, it was instant.
What happened?
The Pharisees and the Herodias groups that usually couldn't stand each other, they immediately teamed up.
Wow. United against him.
Yep. Started figuring out how to, get rid of him. So his center, doing good, prioritizing people's actual well-being, was clearly clashing with their center.
Which was all about sticking to the rules, their interpretation of the law.
Precisely. He wasn't just bending the rules. He seemed to be operating from a completely different set of priorities altogether.
Okay.
For the religious establishment, their focus was really rooted in their traditions, maintaining their authority, that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
But Jesus, later in that same chapter, Mark 3.35, he actually redefines family. He says, whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother.
Whoa, that's a huge shift.
Massive shift in perspective. Suddenly, your family isn't just about your bloodline anymore. It's about shared values, a shared purpose, aligning with God's will.
So, okay, for the people who were all about maintaining the status quo, their traditions, their power structures, Jesus's actions must have seemed completely illogical.
Maybe even threatening.
Yeah, threatening. It's like they had their world all neatly mapped out, and then he comes along with a totally different map.
Exactly right. And when someone challenges your fundamental understanding of how things should be, especially someone who's gaining influence, the reaction can be intense.
So labeling him, calling him crazy or demon-possessed.
It becomes a way to dismiss him, doesn't it? To undermine his message, his authority, so people won't take him seriously.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. One source we looked at actually flips it and asks, was Jesus crazy or was the world crazy?
Ooh, that's good.
Right. It really makes you stop and think about whose definition of normal we're actually using. If you're guided by a different set of principles, a different center, does that automatically mean you're the one who's out of step?
And that raises a crucial question, I think. What happens when your core values, maybe the ones rooted in your faith, are just different from the dominant culture around you?
Yeah.
You might feel like you don't quite fit in, right? Like you're speaking a slightly different language sometimes, especially maybe for second or third gen folks trying to navigate different cultural expectations.
Totally. It reminds me of that accusation back in the book of Acts, chapter 17, I think, where the early Christians get called people who have turned the world upside down.
Yes, because they were living by a different set of rules,
Yeah.
a different center.
Yeah.
And it totally challenged the way everyone else was doing things.
So if we bring this forward to today, living out your faith, trying to follow God's will, might sometimes look a little, well, crazy to the world around you.
It really challenges us, you, me, everyone listening, to think about whose standards we're ultimately living by. Are we just trying to fit into the world's mold?
Or are we orienting ourselves based on a different set of values, God's values, even if that means standing out or feeling a bit awkward sometimes?
It really makes you think. Maybe sometimes what looks like being out of your mind to the world is actually the most grounded, the most meaningful way to live.
It's about having the courage, maybe, to live with that different center.
Absolutely. And like Jesus said in Mark 3:35, whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. He redefined belonging around that shared commitment to God's purpose.
That is such a powerful reminder. It kind of connects to that idea that believers are sometimes described as strangers and exiles in the world.
Exactly. Like your true home, your ultimate citizenship isn't fully here yet.
Yeah. You mentioned that feeling of navigating different cultures. There's this story about a Korean-American student in LA. She felt like she was in a totally different world at university, just kind of lost. But then she found her sense of belonging, her community, within the Christian student group there.
Finding your true family, your true center in that way.
Exactly. You know, it reminds me when I first moved to the U.S. way back, simple things felt so foreign, like always taking shoes off inside the house or the specific way you eat certain foods at someone else's home. It wasn't wrong, just different.
A different set of norms.
And maybe for those of us whose primary allegiance is to God's kingdom, there's a similar kind of feeling sometimes. Like we don't perfectly fit in with all the world's ways of doing things.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's that feeling of belonging when you maybe go back to your roots or connect with people who share that background. Like you mentioned, maybe going back to Korea and seeing everyone with black hair, that instant sense of connection.
Right, that visual cue of shared identity.
But for believers, maybe our ultimate belonging, our deepest identity, is actually in God's kingdom. So maybe some level of feeling different, feeling like a stranger here, is almost to be expected. It's okay.
Yeah, it really does all come back to that Acts accusation, doesn't it? Turn the world upside down.
Yeah.
If you're living by God's values, it's naturally going to look different, maybe even upside down to those who aren't.
Which brings us to a really challenging question, kind of inspired by Isaiah 55. God says his thoughts aren't our thoughts. His ways aren't our ways.
Right, as the heavens are higher than the earth.
Exactly. So the question becomes, whose idea of normal are we actually living by? Is it the world's standard or is it God's?
And could it be that living according to God's will, pursuing his ways, might actually look kind of crazy through the world's lens?
It's possible. Maybe even likely sometimes.
So maybe, just maybe, being out of your mind according to the world's standards, that might actually be the most sane, the most meaningful way to live.
It takes real faith, real courage to keep God's will as your center, even and especially when it looks different to everyone else.
A challenge for all of us, I think. Living centered on him no matter what it looks like.